Hello, I'm back. So, you might remember that I did a little presentation back at the end of the summer on organized crime and the Rico Act, the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, because I'm insane and I like to research that stuff in my free time. We've got another project. This also has to do with Rico because I'm a little weasel and decided to worm that in there and say, hey, I want to do this project. Anyway, it's a little different. This is going to be a little more about the law itself and about how it impacts organized cybercrime, as well as a couple of other laws. So this is a little teaching presentation that I delivered in class earlier this semester, and I'm going to upload it here in case anybody would like to take a look at it. So, I have some fun little transitions here. When you hear the words organized crime, it's very dramatic. What do you think of? What comes to mind? Probably a lot of different stereotypical offensive things that are definitely going to put you on a federal watch list if you're a horrible racist person. Gabagool, the mafia, Joe Pesci, you know, all those things. Anyway, that's not really what organized crime is today. So we're going to talk about organized cybercrime, which is a little different. So what I'm going to cover here is some national and global organized crime issues. It was more of an issue back in the 20th century, but still an issue now. Right now, global crime is more prominent, especially where cybercrime is concerned. So we're going to talk about two laws as well, the Rico Act, which I've already discussed in a previous presentation that you should go watch, and the CFA Act, which is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This is going to be very basic level stuff. So these are some examples of organized criminal organizations that exist now. You probably have heard of some of these. That last one that my head is covering is La Cosa Nostra, so that's what that is. But you're probably already familiar with those, so it doesn't matter. This is just a couple definitions that it's important that you understand what they mean. Racketeering is just what it says there. Fencing is just what it says there. These were two things that were very, very prominent in organized crime and still are. And this is terminology that's used in these laws. So it's just important that you understand what it is. Racketeering, coordinating to collect money by illegal means. So, for instance, let's say that you run a business and somebody comes knocking on your door and says, hey, if you pay us, I'm going to use arbitrary numbers here, $100 a month, we will protect your business from gangsters. And you say, what gangsters? We don't have a problem with that. And they say, well, you're gonna if you don't give us $100 every month. So it's a racket, hence racketeering. So labor racketeering, liver bootlegging, drug trafficking, all these crimes that are listed here, I highlighted those two in red because those are the ones I just defined. So labor racketeering is exploitation of the workforce, so union, employee, employer, industry, by illegal or violent means, domination and infiltration. Okay, so this is one of the crimes, along with several others, that organized crime units, especially in the 20th century, were guilty of. Just syndicate things. Anyway, so the RICO Act, the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. Using illegal income to operate an enterprise, acquiring an interest in an enterprise, and using an enterprise to collect a debt, or conspiring to do any of that. That's the crime that's outlined in RICO. The important thing about this law is that in order to be charged, you have to display a pattern of racketeering. So what that means is you have to have committed at least two or more crimes listed in the enumerated crimes on the RICO Act in the last decade before the arrest. So if that's not true, they can't really use this law to prosecute you. They can use other things if you did an illegal thing, but they can't use this specific law. Some issues with this, it only covers the United States and D.C. and Puerto Rico and the U.S. territories because it's an American law, duh, so it's not a global thing. It took a decade for prosecutors to use the law effectively, which I also covered in my previous presentation that you should go watch. It was written roughly 50 years ago, so you might consider it a little outdated. And crime has evolved since this law was written, and the law has not. This law has not really changed in the last 50 years, to my knowledge, and I researched it pretty extensively. So if I missed something, let me know. I would love to know if this law has changed, but from what I could find, they ain't touched it. Interesting. So some examples of syndicates that exist today. There are older syndicates that are operating online because it makes it easier to operate transnationally. So for instance, the mafia, they use the internet. Shocking, I know, but they do for certain things. For instance, Bitcoin is a little bit harder for law enforcement to trace, so sometimes they will use that for like buying and selling drugs. The only issue with that is that eventually they do have to convert that to cash because otherwise it's useless to them. The whole point would be to get the money. So they then have to find somebody that's willing to buy the Bitcoin from them in exchange for cash. So that's an issue there that we'll talk about it at some other point. But then there are also new criminal syndicates that are exclusively cyber criminal syndicates. So for instance, the Cobalt Gang. This gang was responsible for malware attacks, the Cobalt and Carbonac attacks that targeted 100 financial institutions. I'm sorry, I'm having a stroke. financial institutions globally in over 40 countries, and they stole more than $10 million per heist. And to do this, they used spear phishing emails that they sent to bank employees that had malware in them. So the organized crime definition is criminal activities that are planned and controlled by powerful groups and carried out on a large scale. That is a working definition of organized crime. Therefore, gangs like the Cobalt Gang fall under this definition, and therefore they're criminal syndicates. They are organized cyber criminals. So the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was an amendment to the Comprehensive Crime Control Act that was enacted to address hacking. So it prohibited access to a computer without authorization or in excess of the authorization that you've been provided. So if you have authorization to access a computer for work and you use it for other things, you'd be in violation of this, okay? So these two laws, right? The Rico Act covers a wide range of crimes. It has harsher fines and sentencing, and it's effective at taking down organizations rather than just individuals. So prosecutors use the Rico Act when they're charging gangsters because it's not really effective if you just take down the one gangster, because it's like you have a boat with 100 holes in it and you plug one hole. That's great, but like there's still 99 other holes there that you, so anyway, so Rico makes it easier to plug a lot of the holes, essentially. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act covers illegal access to online information. It addresses hacking and cybercriminal, and it targets individuals instead of organizations. So two different laws, right? Two pretty unique, two very specific laws that address very specific problems, and that's great. But they are old. They are old. The CFAA was introduced in the 80s. Rico was introduced in the 70s. They're old. Crime evolved, so that's the issue. Rico is very vague. It's vague enough to apply extraterritorially because organized crime by nature is not a local thing. It's generally pretty widespread. So it's either interstate or international crime. One solution to the issue of organized cyber criminals or cyber criminal syndicates is to revise Rico to include violations that are committed through computers, because right now it doesn't include any information about violations committed through computers because it's an old law. It was written in the 60s. So it doesn't cover that. DDoS attacks, hacking, malware creation and distribution, intellectual property crime, these are all things that could be added to Rico in order to make it apply to cyber criminals. So that is one possible solution. You can just combine them as well. You can combine Rico and the Computer Fraud Abuse Act. You keep the existing predicate crimes from Rico and the fines and sentencing and the punishments specifically for organized crime, but you incorporate the computer-related offenses from the CFAA. Seems like a great solution, right? They tried to do this, and it didn't work. Not because it was a bad idea, but because politicians are stupid. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Anyway. So in 2011, a senator introduced a proposal to incorporate the CFAA into RICO, the Personal Data Privacy and Security Act of 2011. Maybe you've heard of it. Probably not. I hadn't either. Richard Downing and the Department of Justice actually advocated for this proposal, but it was heavily opposed because they were afraid that, well, what if somebody makes a Facebook profile and they lie about their name or their birthday? I mean, doesn't that mean that then they could get charged on the basis of RICO? Like, doesn't that mean that if they lie about their information on an online profile, I mean, that's technically not okay by law, and that means that they could get prosecuted? Stupid, okay? This is a very innovative approach to facilitate the prosecution of cybercrime by incorporating these two laws, right? So, I'm so sorry. My computer is freezing. Anyway, point being, they introduced it, and it was shot down. It was heavily opposed. But this doesn't acknowledge the fact that RICO's one thing that it says that is a requirement to be charged, if you commit a crime. The one thing, please work. I don't know why it's not going. Okay, RICO, yes. Do you remember what we said? You have to display a pattern of racketeering. So if you just lie about your birthday on a Facebook profile, you can't be prosecuted on the basis of the RICO Act. It doesn't apply to you. If your grandma is afraid about people stealing your information, so she says that her name is Gertrude instead of Louise, nobody cares. Nobody cares, okay? You're not going to get arrested, right? I just feel like that's very important to highlight, so I'm going to flash it a few times. Okay, we can be done now. So yeah, if you give an organization false personal information, you're probably not a crime boss. You're probably not bootlegging liquor or anything like that. So basically, the RICO Act was roughly 50 years ago. The CFA Act was roughly 35 years ago, or as I like to call it, Chick-fil-A Act. And the incorporation proposal introduced by Senator Leahy was 10 years ago, as of now, because I'm making this in 2021. And I'm dating myself by saying that, but I don't care. So the solution, I believe, is not necessarily to propose more legislation, because we have the tools. We have the technology. Let's just combine the laws we already have. The last time that this idea was introduced, it was 10 years ago. It was under a completely different administration. Let's try it again. Unless there's some kind of rule against that, which there might be, because I'm not an expert in that stuff. But I'm just saying, I think it might be a good idea. I think we have the facilities for that, big man. So these are just some sources that I think you should check out if you want to know more. I'm also making a website on the basis of this topic, so I will link that once I have it. But these are just some great sources. The Rise and Fall of Organized Crime, which is just more information on organized crime. The piece by David Schultz breaks down the RICO laws. Jason B. Freeman's piece breaks down the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The piece by Joseph W. Salvador is an argument for updating and incorporating these two laws. Really good read, especially that last one. So, anyway, that's a plug that I included in my class presentation that I don't really need here because we're on YouTube right now.